Good morning. We're going to have a very busy teaching today. I'm going to review a little human history, not just human history, but human beings, human ideas, all sorts of interesting things. You're going to have a wonderful cast of characters to examine. We're going to draw some conclusions at the end, and then I'm going to grade what kind of a grade should we give mankind and his efforts throughout recorded history. And I hope that it will be profitable for you. Before we begin, everybody knows I'm kind of a science geek. I'm not even really a geek. I'm just a layman, but I found the ultimate periodic table for me. It's a periodic table of Bible books. And so I thought that's a great melding of both science and religion. So I don't have time to explain it, but if you don't know anything about the periodic table, it's organized very specifically, and so is that thing. Maybe Hebrews is out of place, but other than that, there's not too much wrong. Our Catholic friends are being dissed there. I thought maybe we could have like a row on the bottom for the the apocryphal books. In as much as I don't, we don't like them, but they're good for them. They should be on there anyway. So anyway, can we put up the picture of Job, please? Job. Has anybody here read the entire book of Job, just out of curiosity? Okay, a few hands. It's kind of a hard book to read. It is, because it's poetical, but it's a lot more than that, and it's kind of goes on. There's a lot of dialogue. It's almost Athenian in the way that they speak with one another. It's a very interesting book, but it's historical as well as prophetical, as well as theological, and there's all sorts of interesting things. But what Job said, Job had a major problem. I don't want to go over the major problem, but you basically know what it is. And God and Satan were making a point through. God was making a point through Job, and Satan was certain that God's point was going to fail. God's point didn't fail. Job not only survived, but he did very well at the end. But there are many, many comments about mankind and mankind's situation that are made in the book of Job that I think are equally as viable in our day as they were back in the day of Job. One small passage I'd like to, Denise, if you want to put up Job 5:6-9, please. Although affliction cometh not forth of the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground, yet man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upwards. I would seek unto God, and unto God I would commit my cause, which doeth great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. There's so much in that passage. But the first thing that strikes me is affliction doesn't come forth out of the dust. It's not like it's the earth's fault, the condition we're in. It's not like it's the air's fault. It's not like it's anything like that. We're saying that there's nothing about our natural our natural surroundings, our physical surroundings that create the dilemmas that we have, that we experience. Yet man is born into trouble. We somehow manage to do quite fine developing problems on our own. Now, why do we do that? Why do we do that? What are some of the circumstances that contribute to that sort of thing? And then he concludes with, God does a great number of unsearchable, marvelous things without number. This is critical. People do not realize how much God is doing, how much of it is obvious. We tend to compartmentalize and marginalize some of the things that we see. Just to be stupid about it, a dandelion. A dandelion is a marvelous work of God. If you see a dandelion, praise the Lord. Okay? That's a pretty simple thing you can do. Anybody can see a tulip and praise the Lord. These are wonderful, marvelous things. I mean, they just didn't get there by accident, So, nonetheless, now, as I like to begin many of my teachings, the great man Ravi Zacharias said, and this is a quote that's worth memorizing. You should all know what Ravi Zacharias said. He said, God has put enough into the world to make faith in him a most reasonable thing, but he has left enough out to make it impossible to live by sheer reason or observation alone. What people don't realize is Ravi Zacharias is taking a slap at the empiricists and the rationalists, philosophers of the Enlightenment period, and that's something we're going to talk about today. Ravi's a very smart guy. When he says cute little things like this, he's usually beating somebody down, whether they know it or not. And it's true. There is enough in the world. I often say on my Facebook wall, I believe in the God of the Bible if for nothing else other than the hydrogen atom. It sounds so stupid, but it's true. I would believe in the God of the Bible if nothing for my favorite atom, the atom number 87, the francium atom. I don't even know what the thing is good for. but I believe that the God of the Bible is real and true and created it because it's an amazing thing. And I can't conceive of it coming about simply by time and chance alone. So there are simple things in this world that I think we take for granted that it would be nice if we all looked at them in their proper perspective. And of course, Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings and queens, I see some queens here, to search it out. All right, this is a critical text in the Bible. God says, do we have any young kids play video games here? Or how about any like 30-year-olds still that played video games? Everybody knows in the video game you get a dumb thing called Easter egg, right? You know what I'm talking about, an Easter egg? All right, these are little things you find in the middle of the game. And they're treasures. You stumble upon the mystic, you bump into the wall and the thing opens and then there's something inside and maybe you get magic powers or something like that. I'm not a video game player, so sorry if I butchered that. But there's Easter eggs in time and space. God has placed Easter eggs, just like a video game, in planet Earth. They're in the form of ideas. They're in the form of discoveries, all sorts of interesting things. And if we would just but look around, we would find many interesting Easter eggs that would give immense proof and glory to the Creator. Now, back to our friend Job, please, Denise, if you want to put that picture back up, please. What was the world like in Job's time? I don't want to dwell on it too long, but I just want to kind of just paint a little picture for you. This is not rocket science. Job was primarily during an age when agricultural way of life was pretty much it. You had land and you had animals and things of that nature. Maybe if you wandered, far away long enough and you were brave enough because you didn't have a car, you had a horse. You'd find a city, and in the city there might be some food and maybe a tyrant or maybe a benevolent king. You don't really know, but basically the world was a pretty steady Eddie place of big cities, randomly, land mostly, and war. And of course, if you got much more than the common cold, you probably died. Life expectancy pretty short. There wasn't a lot of science backing up Job in that day. So you had basic life. You had people that had to work, people that had to rule, and people that were always warring with each other. That really hasn't changed much in our day, has it? Working, ruling, warring. Sort of the same thing today as it was back then. Okay? The question is why? The question is why. And I think we'll try to at least answer that. What I would like to do, and I don't have any idea. I'm going to set a timer here, and I apologize for that. I meant to do this before, because this is the only long part of my sermon. What I want to do is I want to talk about great philosophers. Briefly. Not in depth, briefly. Okay? Because I don't want to bore you. But there are certain people I feel you may be interested to meet. They contributed greatly to our way of thinking. All right? And we can, and I'd like to look at them from a little bit different perspective than merely an academic one. I want to look at them from literally a theologically moral perspective, and let's see what they contributed and how it changed our way of life. So without further ado, I think I picked 17, which is a shame because there's probably thousands of very legitimate, great philosophers that you should all at least have some working knowledge of, but I picked, I think, 17 of them. Some of them are real scumbags, okay? And some of them are okay guys. Not every philosopher is a bad guy, all right? Some of them were more or less, they were, I don't want to say amoral, but they were certainly atheological. Some of them were theological, and some of them were just anti-theological, raving, rabid anti-theological people. But these people came up with ideas, and they wrote books, and they contributed to our way of life. And it's worth knowing a few of them, okay? So without further ado, let's go, Denise. Let's start this is our guy, Socrates. Socrates would more or less be considered the progenitor of Western philosophy. I use his method downstairs in class. The kids hate me for it, because every time I ask a question and they answer it, I ask another question. This is called the Socratic method. I say, how are you? And they say, I'm fine. I say, why? They say, well, because I don't feel bad. I say, well, what makes you so certain you feel good? And then every time they answer a question, there's a new door to be opened, and another rabbit hole to go down, until basically I've driven them completely insane. This is the Socratic method. He was famous for this. Everybody uses it. Lawyers use it. This is what lawyers do. They break people down with Socrates. He's the father of it. By the way, Socrates was a very cranky fella, and got himself into a lot of trouble with the hierarchy of his day because he challenged everything. They had a trial for him. They made him drink some hemlock. He could have escaped. He didn't. He drank it. Died like a man. All right. My favorite story about Socrates is somebody, when he started to become famous all over Athens, some young guy, I hate this, I don't want to Sorry, Barrington, I'm going to use you, but I know there's good people in Barrington, but some Barrington type with a Mercedes drove up to Socrates and said, hey, pal, how about a little one-on-one? I'll pay extra. And Socrates said, I got your one-on-one right here. He grabbed the guy by the scruff of the neck by the hair and dragged him over to a fountain in the middle of Athens, and he dunked his head under the fountain until he couldn't breathe. And then he brought him back up and he said, the next time you want a breath of air, next time you want philosophy as much as you want that breath of air, come back and see me. I thought, what a great story. What a great story. So that's my kind of guy. I could study under that guy. He's like the MMA of philosophers, right? So next, please. This is our friend Plato. All right, Plato. Plato was also a very smart guy. Plato, by the way, he recorded most of what Socrates wouldn't write. He wouldn't write. He always claimed to not know anything. So whenever you asked Socrates a question, he would claim he didn't know, and he would answer it with a question. So everybody else had to do the writing for him because he didn't know anything. If you don't know anything, you can't write anything, right? So Plato wrote a lot of his stuff, and then a couple other guys contributed. But Plato was a smart guy, and he came up with a lot of good ideas. He created his Platonic theory, and I would like to share with you one thing. By the way, I think the Platonic theory is absolute silliness, really, but there is one application in Christianity. Platonic theory, there's a part of the Platonic theory that's called forms. Can everybody in your mind, would you use your mind just for a moment and think of an apple? Apple. I'll bet you most of us had a pretty similar form of apple in our minds when I asked you to do that. Because in his mind, in Plato's mind, there was something in an atemporal, that's outside of time, aspatial location outside of space, called a form for an apple, wherein existed the ideal form of apple. Now, to me, that's absolutely ridiculous. But to him, it made perfect sense, and that's fine. But have you ever considered the concept of the new creation? Created perfect in Christ? I have. I truly believe that when I was born again, I was created anew. There's something that represents the perfect version of me, and thank God it ain't me. Thank God it's the perfect version of me awaiting for me when I leave this life for the next. So in a certain roundabout way, Plato had kind of an interesting, he would have had no idea because he wrote hundreds of years before the Apostle Paul came to explain the new creation. But in a certain sense, I think he kind of came close. He was on the doorstep there, right? And he wrote a lot about Plato's Republic. You wrote about Plato's Republic. And again, Plato's Republic, the same thing that we find in Job's time. He only categorized it. Production, workers, warriors, guardians, and the governing rulers. That's what Plato was all about. Workers, warriors, rulers. And he truly believed, as did his mentor, Socrates, he truly believed that philosophers were the only people that were fit to guide society because they seeked wisdom and they felt that virtue was good and that people were basically good and made mistakes from time to time. Ha! Not exactly. Didn't get that one right, did he? He was not exactly a theist. He was kind of... I really don't know what he was. It's hard to say. Here's what he wrote on God, though. He said, yet there is a God, though not perhaps the simple and human God conceived by the forgivable anthropomorphisms of the adolescent mind. Basically, it's not one of these Greek guys. Sorry. Okay? That's what he believed. Now, next, please. So we're going big three first. We went Socrates, Plato, now we're going to go to Aristotle. I assure you that outside of Karl Marx himself, nobody has done more to influence Western thought than Aristotle. Aristotle was an absolutely brilliant man. And probably it's not bad if you pick up little, when I was a kid, I used to get little Dell books. Everybody know what a Dell book is? It was like a little square thing about this big, and you thought you had like the sum total of all knowledge about something inside of it. You can get a Dell book on these guys, and you can learn a lot. They really contribute a lot to thought. All these guys, by the way, were born in the, Socrates and Plato were born in 400 BC, died in the 300 BC. This guy was born in about 384. He died 332, at least that's what they say. But he formalized logic, and he basically built the pillars of what constitutes now Western philosophy. He finalized it, so he's a brilliant man. So those were the big three. And from them stem most of Western's thoughts on logic, philosophy, and our approach to wisdom. It really does. It doesn't get much more, after these guys, it doesn't get much greater. These guys were the big roots of the giant oak, if you will, okay? But there were others. There were others. I'm only going to give you one more Greek guy. He's my favorite Greek guy, and I'm going to tell you my favorite story about my favorite Greek guy that John doesn't tell you. John and I like Diogenes. You want to throw Diogenes up there, Denise? Oh, yeah, this the guy with the lamp, right? Diogenes was one of these minimalists. He used to like walk. He used to live, if you can picture, he used to live, have you ever seen like a big witch's cauldron where they'd be brewing everything? He used to have one of those, only he used to have it in the market, and he'd tilt it up on its side, and literally in the Greek marketplace where they'd be buying and selling, and he'd live there, and they'd let him live there, and he'd sleep inside of a kettle turned on its side. That was his house. Absolute minimalist, okay? So he was a smart guy, and he had quips for everything. If you said something, Diogenes was going to rip you to shreds. He was kind of like the Bill Maher or the Jon Stewart of his day, only smart, okay? Only smart. And he really wanted for nothing. He tutored Alexander the Great. He was the guy that said, "Get out of my sunlight, you," and this kind of thing. He really had a lot of fun in his day. But my favorite quote from Diogenes is not about if I were not Diogenes, I'd be Alexander. There was a story, and I believe this is probably true because it fits with his character. He was a minimalist. He wanted as little possessions as possible. The only thing he had was that dumb ceramic, or this dumb cauldron that he tipped on its side, but he had a wooden bowl that he used to feed himself. And he saw a poor person in the market dip his hands into the water and bring the water up to his mouth and drink. And Diogenes said, "What a fool I've been all these years, carrying around this superfluous a physical object." And he broke his only bowl. He broke his only possession. I thought, what a great guy. I can hang out with a guy like that. I'd probably invite him into the home, too, so, clean him up a little bit. But a great man, and he contributed greatly to a Western wisdom in the form of cynicism. I'm a bit of a cynic, so I kind of like him. Next, please. Well, I'm skipping a big gap now. By the way, I am skipping, again, hundreds of people. Please don't be offended if I didn't pick your favorite philosopher, okay? He may or may not be there. This is an image of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was, if you read a book about Thomas, if you read anything about Thomas Aquinas, you can't help but walk away with the impression that this man was absolutely brilliant. He was brilliant, all right? They considered him to be the doctor of the church, certainly its greatest theologian and philosopher. And at the time when Christianity greatly needed it, Thomas Aquinas came up with an argument for God from creation. This is something that I do. So I feel like in a certain roundabout way, when you come up with an argument for God from creation, you are walking in the footsteps of great men, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's to be admired, all right? Thomas Aquinas was, he was a number of other things, and I don't want to get on because I'm going to be going on too long about these guys. But he was notably influenced by Aristotle himself, so you can see where the influence was going on. Next. Oh, this is probably one of my favorite guys. This is when I say the gay Frenchman, I don't mean that kind of gay. I mean like he was really a character. This is René Descartes. René Descartes was probably, I think widely considered the founder of modern philosophy. And not only was he a good philosopher, he was a fantastic mathematician. He bridged the gap between algebra and geometry and did all sorts of things. He couldn't stand his contemporaries. He was always beating those guys up. In fact, he so distrusted not only his contemporaries, but his own ability to reason, that he came up with something very unique in order to substantiate that anything that he himself thought was rational. He said, cogito ergo sum, which means don't put Descartes before the horse. Oh, you're not awake. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. So that was a big thing for him. This is a big thing for philosophers, trying to figure out if actually anything that you're doing is something you are actually doing. If anything that you're thinking is actually rational. If anything that you believe you know, you truly do know. So in the world of philosophy, when you say something like cogito ergo sum, it's a pretty big deal. It's like a major, it's like, wow, I just nailed that one, so pretty big deal. All right, René Descartes. Moving on from him, I want to go to, oh, by the way, do you know René Descartes? I'm sorry, go back one more time. There's an interesting story about Descartes. He was a prolific author. He wrote, and he was a Roman Catholic. And it's not like he even wrote anything that was really nasty. He wrote legitimate stuff, scientific stuff, philosophical stuff, all sorts of poems, criticisms of the church hated him. The Pope put all of his books on the prohibited list. Something about legalism. People just want to shut people up. But he really wasn't a bad guy. So if you ever pick up a little Dell book on René Descartes, go for it. Next. Okay. We're doing John Locke. What did I do? Did I miss a page here? I probably did. I sure did. John Locke. Yes, of course, John Locke. Who here knows who John Locke is? I'll bet you some of you do. If you don't, guess what? You do by osmosis. Because John Locke, he was another one of these guys that wasn't just a philosopher. He had many other aspects. He was another absolutely stunningly brilliant man. And the things that he did, the things that he wrote in the beginning of the Enlightenment period, were those things that affected the very founders that became the American revolutionaries that founded this country. If it wasn't for John Locke, the Declaration of Independence doesn't look like the Declaration of Independence, and America doesn't look like America. All right? And the concepts of property, the concepts of business, things of this nature, they don't look like they wouldn't look here like they would look because of John Locke. They would look more like socialistic Europe. He changed things. He formed classical liberalism, which is not a bad thing. We think of liberals and we all want to throw up. But he taught classical liberalism, which in their mind back in those days meant freedom. Freedom. So he did stress the precepts of freedom. He was raised in a Christian household, by the way, but he's a very confused Christian. He let his Christianity get in the way, and it affected him greatly, and he came out the wrong side of the Trinity and a whole bunch of other stuff, kind of like Thomas Jefferson, who was a big fan of John Locke, a big influence. Next. Oh, then we start getting into some interesting period. When you get into the Enlightenment, you're going to notice things are going to begin to change. Things are going to begin to change, and I'm going to discuss what I think was a catalyst to that event. This fella here, David Hume, I think this guy's probably, I could have had tea and crumpets with this guy. Englishman, smart guy, or I think he might have been Scotsman, I'm sorry. He's a smart guy. He was the founder, considered the founder of modern empiricism. Well, what is empiricism? Empiricism is what do you see and can you test it, and therefore we can know if it's true. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. You want to find out if something's empirically true. What is it? Let's test it. Let's quantify it. Then it's true. Okay, then we can actually say it's true. So as opposed to rationalists, where rationalists think about things and decide what things are true, this guy wanted to know if things were true at a different level. But because we're dealing with things, let's say if you were an empiricist and you wanted to discuss the concept of God, this would become rather difficult because you don't have God sitting in front of you there willing to discuss God with you. You have to discuss God in a completely different manner, and this made a lot of the Enlightenment philosophers. That was no good. Sorry about that. I timed myself, and I shouldn't have done that, should I? 15 minutes. The empiricists wanted to find out what was true, and so basically this guy, he was a gateway. He opened the door that said, now we're going to look at things in a different way and try to prove things a different way. And I submit to you that this was the change between man's approach and man's viewing of God and versus the way it would have been, let's say, in Job's day. This was a major change, and you'll see the change now in the philosophers as we go on from here. Let's go with Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant wasn't a bad guy. Immanuel Kant was, and I'm only going to read you one quote from Immanuel Kant, because he was another one of these guys that became an empiricist. He was raised in a Christian, he was probably an agnostic when he died. A lot of these guys were Christian raised, of course, but when he died, he was probably an agnostic. Now listen to this. Kant asserted that because of the limitations of argumentation in the absence of irrefutable evidence, okay, no one could really know whether there is a God and an afterlife or not. Wow, that's a change. You really couldn't know. So we're starting to see now Western thinking infused with the roots of doubt. And I think the roots of doubt, I mean, if I may be so bold, I think Satan's basically having a field day at this point in time. That's what I think. Okay? Because these guys are smart. They're scary smart. You sit down and talk with them. If you say something, they know more. You say something, you think you've got them, they know more again. And when they say things like that, when they say in the absence of irrefutable evidence, you're going, oh, yeah, maybe everything I thought about God, maybe that wasn't true. And then there's that shadow of a doubt. It creeps in. Not good. Not good. Now, there's much more to Kant than that. Don't get me wrong. There's much more. I don't think he was a bad guy, but he was actually pretty critical of a lot of his own philosophical peers. But he too began to fall prey to the empiricism of that day. Empiricism again, observing, testing, closing the door on it as true. Now, the next guy, one of my favorite guys of all time. Get a Dell book on this guy if you're going to get one anyway. Soren Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard's an amazing man. Amazing man. This is the man that influenced my friend Eddie, who recently passed, more than I think almost any other philosopher because of his conclusions on Abraham. A lot of people think Abraham rose up in the morning because he was so happy to do the work of the Lord. I'm going to kill my son, go kill my son. Woohoo! No. Abraham got up early because he couldn't sleep. This is what Soren Kierkegaard concluded. This changed his life, and it changed the lives of a lot of other people who couldn't understand why Abraham would have gotten up early to go and murder his son. Why would any father in his right mind be happy to get up early and go and do such a thing? Well, he wasn't happy. He was miserable, couldn't sleep. You know, this changed for smart people, for intellectual people, believe it or not, that's a whole game changer right there, you know? So he wrote, one of the things that he did, and I'm going to tell you something that I think is really worthwhile. I'm skipping a lot here, but I have to. He was interested in the how because he was an existentialist. He was trying to fit himself into a gigantic universe with so many probabilities in the absence of knowing completely whether or not you knew the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do at that exact point in time and how to deal with it. But what he did, I think he was very human. Kierkegaard, he struggled with the how of to be a Christian. The how. In other words, what did he do? How not to commit suicide, how not to go insane, how to live a happy life and an ethical life rather than a depressed one. Don't tell me that this doesn't occur to all of us at one time or another. All of us have problems inside, even as Christians, and we all wonder why. Why do we have problems? I mean, we're a little bit more advanced here. We understand the sin nature more than most, and I think that helps. But you understand what I'm saying? He wanted to wrestle with the hows and the whys of the Christian faith because it didn't magically go away when you became a Christian, does it? Did anybody here mystically, magically become shiny and happy as soon as they turned their life over to Christ? No, we still have problems. Still have problems, so you got to deal with that stuff. And Kierkegaard dealt with them very well. Now, who let the dogs out? Dogs are being let out now. That was Kierkegaard. He was born and died in the early mid 1800s. But then all of a sudden, this fella, a year after Kierkegaard, 1814, this guy was born. Boy, I'll tell you what. After Aristotle, it doesn't get much worse than this cat. I mean, worse in terms of overall influence. Aristotle's influence, I think, was basically good. It wasn't bad. It was Aristotle's influence was maybe just amoral. It wasn't moral or immoral. It was amoral. This guy is immoral. This might as well be Satan wrapped in the flesh. This is Karl Marx. Karl Marx. Karl Marx, along with his pal, Friedrich Engels, they were not gay. They were just pals. Imagine big Stein-drinking beer buddies. They went out and they just changed the world by creating a socio-economical political theory called socialism, cultural, we'll call it what it is, Marxism. And it basically said that there's always going to be this horrible battle between the rich and the poor, and these poor should run around being revolutionaries and taking everything over, and ultimately we should just be one homogeneous glob of nanny state, ultimately. And people believe this stuff. And I know they believe this stuff because we have rabid proof throughout the entire world. We have Lenin, and we have Stalin, and we have Mao, and we have Pol Pot, and we have this idiot from North Korea, and all these people are running around acting out this guy's dreams. And it never works. It never works. It has a critical flaw. Marxism has a critical flaw, and the critical flaw is that it depends on the inherent goodness of human beings to cooperate with one another at every level of the process. Giving up, sharing, taking. If I have more, I will give you. If you have less, you need, and I'm supposed to understand that. Things like this. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible philosophy that doesn't work very well, and it winds up killing everybody involved. Next, another demon wrapped in the flesh. The odd thing is that I don't know that Marx or this guy, Friedrich Nietzsche, I don't know that they were overtly bad guys. I have a distinct feeling that if you were to have met these guys, they'd probably be pretty jovial chaps. You'd probably be able to hang out with them a little bit, you know? But this guy was internally dark. I mean, really dark. And his You might say that he was extremely hostile to religion. You might. I would say that basically he was the first of the existentialist postmodernism guys. He was really the first to move people into that world. Say, divorce yourself of God, divorce yourself of the things that you believe to be true. It's all about you. It's all about man. It's all about becoming strong. It's all about overcoming. And he changed things. And when you put the value of man first, as Nietzsche did, and you put that together with Marx's philosophies, you put these things together, this is a dangerous combination. This is like nitroglycerin. Is Professor Klump, are you here? Yeah. You can tell me later on again what nitroglycerin is, but I'm pretty certain it's Nietzsche and Marx. Okay? You can tell me if that's correct later on. All right? It's dangerous stuff, okay? He wrote all kinds of books about God, and in fact, one of the books he wrote, his Zarathustra, was to have said the godless words to all the other gods that caused them to all die. And he was mocking our God, and he said about our God, he said, our God said to all the other gods, you shall have no other gods before me. And they all, of course, all the other gods laughed so hard they died. This is how he mocks us, that we Christians are so bold as to declare that we have the one true and living God. You know, this is a rabidly hostile man to religion. So he set the tone. He said, Marx, remember Hume, Kant, they went empiricism, okay? Then you have Nietzsche and Marx. They changed the tables now, and all of a sudden these thoughts are rolling into the minds of men and women, all right, who are writing books, who are teaching children, who are changing nations, things of this nature. Now, some good news, a shining light. Born in 1898, Clive Staples Lewis. I'm not going to say too much about him because we say a lot about him anyway. This guy probably, he's generally not considered a philosopher, and for the life of me, I don't know why. I think he was a philosopher. I think he was a great philosopher, a fantastic philosopher, prolific man, brilliant man. Wrote more about, obviously, God, the Bible, Christ, our position in time and space on earth, our relationships with each other. This is a great, great man. And while the odds were against him in academia, because the academics were growing increasingly hostile to Christianity at this point. Started in the 1800s, big time, and it just steamrolled. Obviously, C.S. Lewis made a great name for himself, and we praise God for him today, because he was a great man. So, not considered amongst the greatest philosophers at all. I can't find him on a list. Ironically, I must have gone through 25 lists searching for who really thought the 25 or the 50 or the 10 greatest philosophers were. I found the most ironic thing. I'm going down this one list, and it was a really good list. And he had some of my guys on there, Locke and obviously Plato and Aristotle, stuff like that. But he had at number 3, this one guy had Saul of Tarsus. And I thought, let me think about that. I had to think about that. But after Saul of Tarsus was Plato and Aristotle. And so I thought to myself, Saul of Tarsus is number 3. Now, Saul had the Holy Spirit working through him. All of what Saul wrote was written from the mind of God, and God came in third. And I thought that was just kind of ironic, because Paul wasn't a philosopher. He was telling you how to be saved. He was telling you what was wrong with you. He was telling you the solution. He was telling you how to live after you receive the solution. What's philosophical about that? I had a hard time seeing that. But it made number 3 on one guy's list. I thought that was kind of cute. So now, we're almost done, and you've been very brave. After our friend C.S. Lewis, came a horde. I mean a horde of... This is when I truly believe, because of the way the empiricists set things up, the way the rationalists set things up, the way the existentialists became Nietzschean, man first kind of a thing. In the early 1900s popped up a crop of incredibly deep thinkers with absolutely nothing to say. But they said a lot of it. And it's such gibberish, and I read some of this gibberish, and I don't consider myself to be a brilliant man. I'm not. I'm no smarter than the average guy out there. And I read this stuff, and I'm like, I can't read it. I can't read it. It sucks. It sucks. I'm trying to understand it, and I can't get it through my cranium. And it started with this guy. You're going to notice a trend here, too. This guy is John Paul Sartre. He looks pretty smart, doesn't he? He got a pipe in his mouth. You know, every time you put a pipe in your mouth, you're just guaranteed like at least 25 IQ points higher, right? John Paul Sartre, this guy is, you want to talk about existentialism and postmodernism, this guy, man, he was making new leaps and bounds, man. He was telling everybody, basically, forget everything you know. We're going to undo everything you've ever thought. We're going to tear it apart. We're going to rip it up. It doesn't mean anything. Forget about concepts like right, wrong, good, evil. Forget about all that stuff. You guys are worrying about the wrong things. We just needed, and so basically he wrote a bunch of books saying, everything you know about morality, throw it out the window. And he wrote that book because Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, and because Karl Marx was talking about equality, because the empiricists were looking for proof that everything could be provable and knowable. It all started in the 16, 17, 1800s, and by the 1900s, guys like this guy, and this guy was a Nobel Prize winner, by the way. He refused his Nobel Prize, to his credit. But his buddy, his next guy, Albert Camus, that's Albert Camus, he got a pipe too. These guys were smart. All right, another 25, a brilliant man. Both these guys are brilliant. But this guy, again, wrote more books about nothing and the valueless of suffering, the valueless of love. Nothing has any meaning, and people read this stuff, and they continue to read it today. John Paul Sartre and Edward Camus are extremely sought-after aspects of upper philosophical academia in college. They read this stuff, and then they go on, they graduate, and they become politicians. And you wonder why your money's getting taken away from you. Okay? But I'll tell you a short story. This guy really heavily influenced me. Because I read, my senior year in Arlington High School, I had a philosophy class. Yes, indeed, I actually did study from time to time. And in that class, we read his book, The Stranger. And in this book, The Stranger, there's a story about a man who's on a beach just enjoying himself. For some reason, he's got a .38 in his bag. Don't you always bring a .38 to the beach with you? And so he sees an Arab sitting on the beach. He doesn't like him. He can't figure out why he doesn't like him. He just doesn't like him. Because I don't like this guy. Shoots him. And the whole book is all about whether it was the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, the repercussions of what happens after you do it. Does it really matter whether you spend your whole life in a cell or not in a cell? It's idiotic. He wrote a whole book. He won a Nobel Prize, too, for literature. And he accepted his. All right? His buddy Sartre didn't, but this guy did. So next, please. Gibberish. Ooh. Ooh. No, that's not a monster. That's not some psycho. That's my least favorite philosopher in the entire world. The postmodernist, he denied all titles. He didn't want any titles. He was so divorced from having any meaning, he didn't want to be called anything. That is Michael Foucault, probably still the most influential philosopher in modern higher academia. The most. Raving, the two guys before him, Sartre and Camus, card-carrying communists. They believe too. So did he. And he was a rabid homosexual, supporter of homosexual rights, visited the bathhouse in San Francisco while he was writing all sorts of meaningless gibberish, screwing up people's minds, died of AIDS, knew he was dying of AIDS, willingly gave it to as many of his partners as he could as a sign of his true commitment to his existentialist cause. Just a horrible, horrible human. Prolific author, too. Prolific author. Demon in the flesh. Responsible for educating anybody in higher philosophical academia. A terrible, horrible man. Next. We're almost done. Last guy. Oh, imagine that. Another pipe. This guy is, I'm going to butcher his name because I don't have a European tongue. He's a French. Foucault was a Frenchman too, but I can handle that one. But this guy's name is Jacques Derrida, D-E-R-R-I-D-A. He recently died, 2004. He was one of the ones that he was born in 30, died in 2004. He's the last of our most influential. I don't know myself. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't any, but I don't know myself any more influential philosophers still alive after this guy. He died in 2004. He formalized deconstructionalism. He pulled the pillars out of everything, even those who came before him, and now it's gotten so bad that he formalized a system known as semiotics. You don't have to know what semiotics is, but let me give you because I have a book on it. It's another one of those books I said, I can't read it, I'm trying, but I can't read it. And the book of semiotics is all about signs and guttural noises and movements and things like this and how we communicate and how we transmit ideas. It's horrible. Horrible. Guy wrote like he wrote a book a year, this guy did. He wrote a book a year. Super influential in the colleges today. This, my friends, this is your modern mind. That's what's in the schools. These guys, we have gone from honest men, like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, genuinely honest men, maybe not, they weren't biblical men, but they were honest men. We've gone to absolute cartoonish figures. And we slipped there during the Enlightenment with the help of Nietzsche and Marx. We slipped there. So now all meaning has been stripped from our way of life. And we wonder, how does this affect us? Well, I'll tell you how it affects us because I teach it downstairs. It affects us because first of all, if you throw theology out the window, which they've already done, obviously none of these guys are theologians. Throw it out the window. Then you have philosophy. But below that, your philosophy is going to translate into sociology, psychology, biology, history, ethics, politics, law, all of it. It's going to filter in there, kind of like when you take medicine, or just say a drug. When you take a drug, how does a drug work? It gets into literally into your system, we call it a system, gets into your bloodstream, it infuses your blood cells, it changes your nerves, okay? Ideas do the same thing. Ideas get into our system, into our blood system, and into our nerves, and then they become part of our way of thinking, and they can warp our way of thinking without a biblical worldview. So I would say that basically those are some of the people that have had a major influence on mankind throughout the day. They're not all by any I didn't even mention people like Confucius, for example, very influential guy. But fortune cookies aren't really big in America. They may still be big on the Far East. So, now, I need to check my time real quick. I'm sorry. Oh, I have a little bit of time left. Oh, that's good. What I want to do now is I want to talk about one more. I think we can get one more really neat thing in for you before we go. What was the success of these men leading into the 20th century, last century? Let's look. By the time Sartre and Camus had become popular and Nietzsche and Marx had settled in, all of a sudden, right after the First World War, about 1933, Denise, can you put up the first one? You saw these things pop up. Humanist manifestos. A humanist manifesto is mankind taking his finger, poking it in the eye of God and saying, we don't need you anymore. We've got it all figured out. We've got it all figured out. So people wrote up a humanist manifesto. It was a pretty big deal. And it said how man was going to be moving into a new era of glorious thinking. He didn't need God. We didn't need this silly construct. Sure, when you didn't understand why earthquakes were happening or why the land was dry or why you weren't getting any rain or whatever it was, you needed a God. And maybe sacrificing a few kids made perfect sense to you back then, but now we don't need that. We've got it figured out. Science was supposedly enlightening man to the point where he no longer needed God. Now, that was the first one, I think, came out in, I want to say, 33 or 37. The next one, please. The next one. There was a little thing called the Second World War. See, after the First World War, they thought it was all done. They thought mankind had just wiped their anger out of their system, but then Hitler came. And so the first Humanist Manifesto was kind of erased by the acts of the Second World War. And we have some people in this room that are vividly familiar with the evils of the Second World War, okay? Some people not so much, but maybe as they mature, they will become. Well, the Second World War changed everything again, so they had to write a new Humanist Manifesto, where again they said, God, we've gotten better now, we're done with this war business, we don't need you, sticking my finger in your eye, see ya, okay? But the Second Manifesto was hostile. I want to read from you one thing from that Second Humanist Manifesto because it is stunning. Can we go, oh, by the way, John Dewey signed the first Humanist Manifesto. You know who John Dewey is, right? Only the most influential person in the public school system today. Okay, humanist. You know what, I kind of blew that, Denise. Can we go back, I want to go back to the no deity will save us. Yes, I like this. Humanist Manifesto. No deity will save us. We must save ourselves. And we are responsible for what we are and for what we will be, both of which may present difficulties for members of certain Christian, Jew, and Muslim. Yeah, you think? It's going to present a little difficulties for Christian, Jewish, and Muslim sects. Or are believers in the doctrines of submission to the will of an all-powerful God? Yes, of course. But this is hostile. They were, again, deconstructing, pulling the pillars out of religion. And it got so bad that in the Second Humanist Manifesto, one of the contributors, a fellow by the name of John Dunphy, he said the following, and you need to know it because it's a pretty big deal. I am convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom, by teachers that correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity that recognizes and respects the spark of what theologians call divinity in every human being. He's channeling Nietzsche. Channeling Nietzsche there too. You see, the Übermensch, okay? The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism, resplendent with the promise of a world in which never realized Christian ideal of love thy neighbor will finally be achieved. You realize how heavy that is? How hateful that is? Oh my God. You're going like this if you meet a guy like you're putting up the cross, looking for your garlic. This guy's got it bad. He wants a Christ-like world without the Christ. It's amazing. See, here's the thing. We as Christians, we have to acknowledge this. Since we fail so miserably at being Christians, where does the Bible say we're going to succeed as Christians again? We fail at it. They look at us and they say, this is why it's not working, because they can't even do what it is they're supposed to do, so we're going to have to do it for them, but they don't realize that they're lacking, as bad off as we are, they're 100 times worse. They're going to try to accomplish what we can't accomplish with the Holy Spirit, minus the Holy Spirit. It's not going to work out very well for them, So that's Humanist Manifesto. This is all from Humanist Manifesto number 2. And that came after the Second World War. Humanist Manifesto number 1 came after the first. But Humanist Manifesto number 2 was 1973, I believe. Howard Kurtz wrote that one up. I think does he still write for the New York Times? I don't even know. He's old now. But then we still had problems. We had 9/11. We have all sorts of things going on. And in 2003, another Humanist Manifesto. Now, this Humanist Manifesto was a little bit shorter than the other ones because they really wanted, they probably almost had to just stop talking. Because everything that they said turned out to be wrong. It was incorrect. It was basically useless gibberish, much like those philosophers that we studied. And here, the core, but they still managed to stick a finger in the eye of God because they ran down the 7 commandments of modern humanism that were all predicated upon the observable evidence and only evolution. Empiricism and evolution, okay? I'm telling you, this all started happening around the 1700s. So in that sense, mankind has been searching for himself. Humanistically speaking, mankind has been saying he's going to get better now for about 100 years. Hasn't changed. For thousands of years before that, he's been outlining all of his problems. Hasn't changed. We're still a nation of workers, of warriors, of rulers. Hasn't changed. What really has changed since Job's time? I'm going to tell you something that's changed since Job's time. I'm going to tell you something. I'm getting my lights right on time for a change, too. When we come back, I am going to take you back to the seminal event that will bring all of this together. Okay? It will help you to understand, I think, the seminal event that made people like Nietzsche, like Marx possible, and what God has done to undermine this event, this change that enabled these horrible people to come into existence. We're going to talk about the solution to that, and I shall encourage you by the end of the second half. So we might go a little bit over, but I hope I won't be boring in doing so. I'll make it profitable for you. Bill.